Hey guys, I'm Liz, and today I just kind of wanted to talk about Pixar's Soul, especially right now since I've seen the film like a few days ago, and it kind of like gave me some time to reflect on what I had to say with it, especially since I wrote a few notes during and afterwards, and I wanted to say firsthand, like, this is just my perspective on how the film is. And honestly, there were some rushed moments, I think, as far as storytelling goes and stuff like that, though I am not a professional when it comes to films in general. However, I do want to say that this video will be going into spoiler territory, so if you're not into that, please just bear that in mind. If you want to hear my thoughts about the discussions being had through this film, as far as like some people don't like it, some people do, some people are kind of mixed. I'm kind of the ones that's mixed on it, but I did like the whole general idea. But there was some stuff like I would have changed to overall make it a bit more serious, because this does come off as an adult film rather than a child's film, as most Pixar movies would feel like. And overall, I will probably say a few controversial things, because a lot of people, and I'll go more in detail about this, a lot of people went in this thinking that it was gonna be like Coco. However, I think that was more of a thing of focusing on the race of the character other than the plot synopsis or anything of that detail. But for the most part, I'll get more into why that is after the whole general review of this film, into like overall thoughts of people within the viewingship of the community or anything of that nature, so stay tuned. In our establishing shot, we are introduced to Joe Gardner, who is currently in this position of being a middle school band teacher part-time. However, you can tell he does have a discomfort in this genre, or even just this job in general, especially since it evolves around kids, just not really grasping an understanding or love for jazz as he does, or music in a general environment. However, during this moment, we are introduced to I believe one of his students. It's sad that I can't remember her name, I should have written it down, but anyway. She ends up just falling into this whole rhythm and getting quote-unquote lost in the music, or the lost in this passion while she's playing. And this provides Joe Gardner into a teaching moment with these students to actually express like, hey, that's okay to get lost into those moments and stuff like that. And we kind of see like he does have that mentor ability when it's getting put into his lap, as far as it being something he's more comfortable with. After this, we do get him getting into the full-time position that includes like insurance and things of that nature, and he's still uncomfortable with learning or trying to perform in this environment, since it's not part of his dream, which was actually to be a professional just jazz player in a general environment. I'm saying general too much, I should stop. Anyway, after all this, and he informs his mother about what's going on with getting this job position, he gets a call from one of his former students, Curly, who actually gets, by chance, to get Joe Gardner in a position to perform with Dorothea Williams, which is a huge deal to Joe Gardner because he looks up to her as a huge role model, which is honestly a very beautiful moment to see, in my opinion, especially as an artist who just, like, I look up to a lot of other artists, and just like, to have something that would be like that would be just absolutely phenomenal. So of course, like, I could see like this is a passionate expression. However, we do end up seeing where Joe Gardner, technically I would say he's dying, even though in this case later into the film he is in a coma. Surprise, surprise. But it's just like, with this whole like where he's going to the great beyond, he basically freaks out, like he's not ready. And I failed to mention like how this happens. Like, it kind of happens so quick, but at the same time like you're bracing for it. because during the scenes with it, you have it establishing shots where he's being not cautious about where he's walking or anything like that. Even someone yelling, like, if he has a death wish or something, or he's, like, the more he's being distracted by being on this phone call, he's gonna die. And sure enough, he ends up falling into a sewer portion, or a quote-unquote manhole, I'm pretty sure is the technical term for that, and is presented onto this, like, I want to say like a conveyor belt to the great before, where he's very confused as to what's going on until he realizes, like, hey, there are other people behind him, and he was like pretty much asking, like, what is going on, and it's just like an older woman's like, well, I've been waiting for this for my whole life. Like, okay, awesome, good to know. Establishing shot, like, this is supposed to be an in-depth film about death and along the lines of passion, which I thought was like, okay, that is actually pretty interesting to come out of Pixar. I'll give them that. Still feels like a kid's film to an extent, but it's still just okay. Anyway, amongst just being so all overwhelmed about not wanting to pretty much die, he finds himself in the Great Before because he slips through this whole barrier thing, which I'm not even sure how that works. That's kind of the thing that I'm pretty sure that's more fantastical. You're not supposed to question it. Kind of like how whenever he is now in the Great Before portion, you're not supposed to question what the Jerrys are. And oh goodness, I haven't even gotten to the Jerrys yet until now. But the Jerrys, like, they come off as angels to me, especially as someone who's grown up religious. They just have this kind of like angel-y vibe where they help newborn souls get their personalities and things like that, which I thought was very interesting just to see that. And they're just showing them around with these new souls, which are technically, I would say, infants in a way, or just maturing the soul and mentality of the being, which I thought, like, okay, I can see where this is coming from. I can see what's going on here. And that's basically like a nurturing environment. However, they have to keep people, I say people, I'm meaning their souls, as mentors, especially those who are just very broad on like philosophy, or even just very passionate individuals that are very well known. Like, let's say Muhammad Ali was mentioned in this. You even have, like, who was it? Dang it. I can't think of her name now. But it was like one of the early saints and stuff like that, which is very popular, and that's unfortunate that I can't remember that despite being in a religious household, but okay. But it's just like Mother Teresa, there we go. Anyway, it's just, you have all these people that were to be mentors to these souls to get them their spark. And honestly, this first came off as like the spark being a passion and all that, and I thought, like, okay, I see where this is going. Like, I get it. They have it where it's like these whole rooms of like hobbies or things that is just like normal earthly embodiments. However, we come to find out that Joe is obviously not supposed to be in this, and he gets put into one of the more psychological routes person's body. Or putting his like name tag on without like realizing, like, hey, I'm not actually this person. Which I thought was kind of a loophole, because wouldn't you be able to kind of like see the soul for itself and see the person's body and like tell, like, that's not them. Unless, in this scape, Joe Gardner can only see what he's seeing due to one of the Jerrys going like, oh, it's how your feeble mind can present us, or only where your feeble mind can comprehend it. And it's like, probably everyone sees it something different. And I would hope so. Like, that's kind of a loophole that I see in it, but at the same time, who knows? So be it. Keep going with flow. Before we get to this route of like the mentorship portion of the Jerry's segment, we have it where one of the Jerrys introduces themselves, and I'm saying themselves because the Jerrys, they don't seem to have like a construct of gender or anything like that. Especially if, like, it doesn't matter if it's like a female voice or a male voice with it, there's clearly no construct of gender within this segment. Whew, I need to take a breather. Anyway, amongst doing this, we get scene where Joe Gardner's questioning where he is, like, am I an HE double hockey sticks, which a lot of the, like, little souls, which are supposed to be kind of like, in my mind, I interpret it as infants because they act like toddlers or children or whatever. And they just basically go like, oh, hell! And they just like all repeat after each other. Like, it's a cute moment, but then it's like, that kind of clicked in my mind, like, nope. This ain't supposed to be for kids. This is gonna be a pretty adult film. And I'm totally okay with that. I want to see more films like this. And all that, even if it's like not vulgar. Like, we need more existential films that go into topics like this, because it's just kind of like, they're enjoyable without having to be very crude or crass with humor or anything like that, because most people think of like animation like, oh, it's only for children. Like, no, let's get rid of that stigma, please. Anyway, I'm going off on this like whole tangent about that now before I had to edit a lot of stuff out right now. Anyway, with this, we get introduced to 22 during the mentorship, and 22 is a soul that's been on this soul world, or the Great Before, or now it's called the, or they're trying to rebrand it to, like, oh, it's the, dang it. The name for it just left me. Dang, I should have wrote it down. I'm that dumb. I was focused more on the characters half the time than I was on the places or names or whatever, but I'm just gonna call it The Great Before as it was presented by. Anyway, we're introduced to 22, who has been there for a millennia, pretty much. And basically, she's voiced by Tina Fey, and I'm fine with that. Like, Tina Fey did a great job with presenting this character. I'm gonna be real with that. Like, she did really good, even though I personally don't care for her as an actress. Especially since it's like, I don't find her funny. But the writing for this character was funny enough where she can actually get it right. So I thought that was very nice. And it really fit like the very cynical side to this character, which was a nice flow between someone who's highly passionate and someone who's just like, nah, I've seen it before, I don't care. However, we see this arc begin to come up throughout the film whenever there's this body swap scenario. I don't really want to get too deep into it because honestly, I kind of agree with some people whenever it comes off like a blackface kind of thing. Because in a somewhat way it does, but it's like a tightrope with it. It's the best way to put it. Like, it's a teaching moment for the character, but it's just, I wouldn't agree with having like a white woman voice for this scene in particular, even though it's like their personalities and how they're voiced creates a good foil, a good character foil for it to mash up. It's just, I don't know, like, it's hard to explain where it's just like, it's not entirely racist, but you could see where some people are very upset by it, because it's just like, it's iffy. It is very iffy, and I kind of wish they chose a black woman, maybe with a black woman who has a very similar voice acting range for this character, because that would have been a lot better than putting Tina Fey in this. And of course, you have Joe Gardner, who happens to get his soul into a cat. And prior to this, the reason why this body swap happened was because they just went in far too fast into these things through like a whole spiritual kind of thing. And I want to call like the soul world of being in your passionate state the spirit realm, just so my mind can comprehend like what's going on. Because the spirit realm is either like your I wouldn't want to go too biblically with it because I know someone who can definitely, like, he could go and tell you more about this kind of stuff, and he was like my favorite teacher. I love him to death. I need to get in contact with him again and just see how he's doing and how his wife is doing and all that. But anyway, it's just like, in this film I kind of saw that soul passionate moment where you're able to kind of like transfer into it or meditate into it, more so as like a spiritual realm than it is like personality realm. And I can see this by either someone being very passionate into what they're doing, that they just get in the zone per se, which is actually what this realm is called. It's called the zone. However, you have it where these lost souls are just deep down into like some kind of, I want to call it more so anxiety and depression. Though I think Inside Out did a much better job with handling depression in this state, because it's more so on the lines of a mental thing in this game, while this world of soul creates a more of a spiritual, in my perspective. That's the kind of great thing about this film though, is that you can have many conversations on it, and you can understand people's worldview a bit better, because in Soul, things are pretty vague, but you get more of a grand scheme of what's going on, as far as it being interpreted. Which I think is good, because it can kind of like morph itself into someone's worldview, like, okay, I understand this, however, the person next to them would probably be like, no, I think this way about it. And it creates a good conversation piece. I think this film was meant to be a good conversation per se, because it looks to be like that's supposed to be the purpose, is to start a conversation. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm getting more on a tangent side. Let's continue. We have this villain character called Terry, who is in charge of the numbers. And I'm also gonna give Terry like the they them pronouns, because it's just kind of like, I don't really see them as like gendered characters and all that. I just see them as like constructs of who they're supposed to be within the spiritual scape. Now Terry, I'm saying he because he's voiced by, it sounds like voiced by a man, or the voice comes off as a masculine voice, but they're very weak as a villain. There was no build up to their villainy or anything like that, other than them being very arrogant. And it's just, I just couldn't get behind that at all, because it's just, I don't know, like this film would have done a lot better without Terry in it. However, for the climax of the film, it does present it like, okay, that's how they get back into sorting out things, but it's just kind of like, me no understand? I don't understand this. But that was really the only point, like, I couldn't understand. Like, I loved the score that accompanied Terry. However, it was just, the character themselves was just bland. The movie could have done a lot better without this character. Anyway, as 22 is in Joe's body, and as Joe is in this cat's body, we kind of see that 22 gets to live their life. And I'm using there because I'm pretty sure 22 is not really confirmed to either be male or female or whatever yet, because they're not born yet, even though they're voiced by Tina Fey. So if I mess up and say her, I apologize, but it's just kind of like, oh well. 22 ends up just experiencing life for what it is, just like the small things of enjoying life. Like, let's say a pizza tastes really good and they just enjoy it so much, like it's just like a wow feeling, and it's just small things that people don't really look at anymore, which I thought like, okay, we're going this route, even though we kind of set it up for Joe to be a mental, like, this is my main portion where I'm gonna go into my thoughts more on this a bit later, but it's just, it kind of felt convoluted with what they were trying to set out. However, it was still kind of cohesive, but it's more of a walking the talking film where you're just like understanding it in your perspective, which again is a great idea. Anyway, Joe eventually finds his way back into his body after 22 actually did find their spark. And I didn't explain the spark stuff, but for the most part, Joe gets this idea that sparks is supposed to be a passion thing, and the only reason that 22 even got a spark, or the spark, in order for their soul to be put into Earth in the first place, was because of how, I guess it's just like, whatever, trying to figure it out. Like, it's kind of confusing, but at the same time, it's just like, you would think it would do to something about like hobbies and passion, but it's not. I'll go more into this for the climax of the film. Anyway, Joe Gardner finally gets back in his body. He performs with Dorothea Williams, and he finds out that it's not all that it's cracked up to be. Like, he enjoyed himself, but it's just like, there's a disappointment factor to it, and I thought that was brilliantly done, in my opinion, because it's just like, most times in life, a lot of things will be very disappointing. And that is honestly a great story to tell, whether you're a kid or a grown adult, is that life isn't always going to be high hopes and stuff like that and getting your dreams met, because those high hopes may be like, oh, I didn't really gain much from this. However, we do see on the side of it where it's just like, he finally realizes through 22 being in his body, actually did experience the small things in life, which I'm like, oh, okay. We are going down this route, which, again, it is not a bad idea to go down this route. I thought it was good to do this because it's just so many small things can mean so much to one person. And yeah, like, that is something, it's a broad spectrum to go on, but it's just something that needs to be written a little bit better, because during this scene where we're introduced to even Joe's memories along with the memories that 22 had while in Joe's body of the small little details, we just kind of like get this idea that it does go a bit too fast. I agree with most commentary YouTubers that I've seen talk about this film, that it went a little bit too fast, that there should have been more of a experience where, like, I haven't even touched on like Joe with the connection with his father and connection with his mother, because it's just, you don't get that impact like you feel it should, which kind of does lead to my final thoughts on the film, which I'll talk more on in a minute. But it's just kind of like, you wish that there was more insinuation that his life was basically, the best word to put it is like, you experience so much, yet you're very mellowed out, you know? Like, he just didn't fully grasp the small things of life and was focused on the big dreams, that he overlooked the things that actually truly mattered, and that included like family and so forth and so on. Like, I would have loved to see more of this family dynamic. Like, that would have been amazing for this film. But we unfortunately don't get that. We just get a couple of slideshows, which is fine. That could do perfectly in a film. That can do very nicely. It just felt rushed. Anyway, Joe decides to meditate on this and actually enters himself into the soul world to actually give 22 back her pretty much spark pass or earth pass, just so she can, or they can, go to Earth and actually live and all that. And 22 happens to actually turn into a lost soul And we see this, like, it's anticlimactic, but at the same time, I thought, like, I kind of like this slow pacing of it, because it's just like, that is what it is to be feeling in these very death moments, because it's just like, when 22 is in this lost soul state, or I want to call it more so a depression state, you see where it's just like a lot of people are just like, who she basically interacted with and very much talked down to her. We already seen earlier in the film where a lot of characters or a lot of influential people that are actual people talking down to her, and it's just like, that just, as someone who has dealt with that really just like, yeah, that's definitely what I needed to see in a film, because it's just like, that is how it feels, despite how anticlimactic it may be in the film. In that person's perspective, it is very dark, it's very overbearing, it's overwhelming. Like, that is something like, yeah, definitely they did pointed that out pretty well, I would say. Anywho, eventually Joe does figure out how to get to 22 just to make sure, like, they understand, like, hey, it's okay, and you actually did experience life, and you actually do deserve this. Which leads to 22 actually going to Earth, and then Joe is back on the conveyor belt of going to the great beyond, or heaven, hell, whatever. It's just kind of like, he's heading towards that path, and honestly, I would have really liked if they just kind of actually have him accept death and actually accept what he has done in his life. That would have been an amazing tool to learn from and things of that nature, because I think more films should actually be more of accepting, not necessarily a suicidal way, but I mean, like, in a form of like, hey, we don't always have a happy ending. We don't always come to peace. However, you can make peace through small things in life and actually realizing what that helps. And we kind of see this where it's just like, it was subtly put in there. This is a movie full of subtleties. I couldn't say that right, but it was full of subtle moments. Like, if you go back and watch it or go back and think about it, you actually see some small moments where it's like, 22 does have this whole dialogue where she's just saying, I'm pretty sure dialogue is the word. I'm pretty much, I could be very wrong. I'm sorry to any writing people out there, but it's like, I could be wrong if I'm saying dialogue, but you have it where she's just, they are, whatever, thinking back to where it's just the life overall that she experienced, even though she was in Joe's body, they were. Anyway, while they were in Joe's body, they did experience what was coming from life. What it was actually worth living for was the small things, and just someone on the subway yelling at them, or them seeing someone actually passionate about something, like small things, or even just like, there was this tree sapling thing that actually fell from one of the things, and it just, yeah, hard to explain, but it's the small things. It's like something that was very hit home, and I went on a huge tangent about that. I apologize. But it's just like, I agree with that. Like, I think that was an excellent way to interpret how life is worth living. It's just, you can kind of see where it's going off with like life worth living compared to what I said earlier, where I think Joe should have accepted death. Like, that is hypocritical on my part, but also somewhat hypocritical of the film, because I was really expecting Joe to accept going to the great beyond and that being the end of the film. However, the Jerrys decide to give him his life back, and he takes that advantage to get his life back. And honestly, like, I see where it's, like, coming from, where it's like, oh, life isn't worth living, but it's just kind of like, that kind of didn't help with the plot, but it kind of did. Like, I want to hope this is true, but I kind of hope that the film did want to make some of the audience feel disappointed with the ending as much as we seen disappointed earlier in the film. Or seeing Joe get disappointed with how things are, because I don't know, it could have been like that existential crisis with it, but at the same time, we just don't know. This film can be interpreted in many ways, of course, which is one of the great things about film in general. But you get the idea, like, that should have been the case, or for me, that should have been the case, but it doesn't happen, so it's just kind of like disappointed in that, but yeah, I'm gonna be fine and live with this. So be it. Still a good movie. Still a very wholesome film, even if it has a lot of adult themes in it. And by adult themes, I mean more so on the lines of life rather than, like, sex or something. Because a lot of people think sex equals adult. Not exactly. Like, you can have a movie without vulgarity and stuff and it still be very adult in nature. Which I think should be a case in point to actually figure that out. So, of course, this isn't the best Pixar film, but I would say it is one of the most adult films, right up there with Ratatouille, which does have more of an adult background rather than it does with right here, where the maturity is up to the forefront. Anyway, you do have the elephants in the room, which would be the discussion around the film, especially revolving around Black culture. Okay, I'm gonna say this straightforward. I can't speak for anyone within the Black community, let alone I can't speak for anyone in a general sense. Just because, like, that is not my place to speak. For a long shot, I do think, yes, there should be more films based around culture, especially differing cultures compared to white people or European or anything of that nature. We should have more of a diverse film study into different cultures rather than it just being the documentary or a very fetishization of someone's culture. However, I have seen where people really just, they seen Soul as like, oh my goodness, the first Pixar film with a main black character that isn't presented in a racist character or anything of that same. I'm not saying Pixar has done it, but obviously Disney has done a lot of stuff like that in their past. And it's just like, okay, whatever, like, I can't. Cringe. Anyway, a lot of people went into this expecting Coco, and I understand this is going to be a can of worms, and if there's going to be a discussion behind it or even backlash behind it, I'm willing to accept it. I'm still just thinking, like, a lot of people went into this thinking Coco because they relied so heavily on Joe Gardner's race being African American, being in New York, jazz, and stuff that was presented in the film that was representative of African American culture. And the reason why I'm saying African American now instead of just black as an overall arcing is because you have different people who are black that are not from America. They could be from Canada or even just Africa or in general. They could be from, hell, probably even Russia, for crying out loud, and still have differing experiences as to what's going on within their own environment and in their own culture. That being said, like, I still think, like, there should be more films focusing on differing cultures. But people did go into this really thinking Coco over a more mature story. It's just like, looking over it, like, you see more like Pete Docter has done Inside Out and a few other films that do revolve more on, like, the maturity and psychological side rather than a cultural side. But it's just kind of like, it's hard to put it into words without sounding very condescending. But I do think that some people just really focused on Joe Gardner's race other than what the plot synopsis was. or the plot of the film in general was. Then again, I don't blame people for jumping to the conclusion when it comes to race, because when it comes to it, you would think since the film is Soul, it would focus on a lot of black culture. There were even instances in this film where it kind of subtly hinted at a black culture thing, especially with family values and African American culture, especially in New York or around general jazz environments. You even have it where it's this one scene when Joe Gardner was a teen and his dad introduces him to jazz, and that was something that was just, I wish it could have had more focus, I really do, because that would probably get more people to work on. However, it was more so taken into like a racial sense than a literal sense with that kind of insinuation. But yeah, I can see where people can make that insinuation, because that is something that I kind of realized by thinking like, oh, okay, they could have went into a different archetype to make sure that insinuation did not happen, but who knows, publicity gets a lot of stuff going, so they could have done it intentionally, who knows. Though of course we do need more representation in film, especially here in America. We do need to actually work on that, especially due to how Hollywood was in the past and how we're slightly changing. And I say slightly is because you still have a lot of films out there that do continue with a lot of racial insensitivity, along with a lot of prejudice within those markets, even with stuff that is not even dealing with race. It could either be dealing with sexuality or stuff in general with mental illness being presented, or mental disabilities, or just a lot of stuff that's just mishandled in Hollywood. And we need to really work on that, I believe. Anyway, that is definitely a topic for another time, especially right now, where I am trying to get into a video about Hollywood censorship with stuff regarding sexuality, race, or even just mishandling disabilities. Like, that is something I kind of want to get into. So, yeah. Though, back to Soul. From what I can understand with my final thoughts, it is a good film. However, there were things that I would have changed for the better, or for my perspective. And that is mostly dealing with Joe Gardner's plot focus in this, and I'm sorry there's background noise. But just making sure to more so focus on his character, either with the mentor position or other stuff within this film, because it's a lot to take in for it. Overall, it is supposed to be a more philosophical film, and I enjoy that in a film, especially if it's handled very well. I think it was handled very well here, even if there are some stuff that I'm kind of like iffy on, more critical on, and so forth. But I think they've done the soul world in a vague sense of just where almost any type of identity would get a grasp of what's going on, whether it be from a religious perspective or even a atheist perspective. You would kind of get an overall sense of what's going on for this film, so that's a plus. And I do think that this film is meant to start more of a conversation, and I hope to see that more in the future. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it was a rather long one. If you want more of this content, let me know. If you want less of this content, let me know. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, things of that nature, of course, just to keep my channel going, I guess. But that being said, I'm out, and I hope all of y'all had a great new year so far. Take care.